umugabo wanjye yapfuye kuri 22 z'ukwa kane ni nkaho yari gitangira hano hafi ni ku muhanda hano ruguru bamwiciye byahise bisakuza yishwe na kanaka kandi nsanga ndabazi.
Ingoma Nysha, it means a new drum and also a new kingdom. We wanted to propose a new chapter in the history of culture in Rwanda, a new era.
We have orphans, we have widows, we have children of perpetrators.
We were proposing a space where people will feel safe again.
Reconciliation is not only about two people. People need to reconcile with themselves, with happiness, with life. Because many people were really unhappy to be alive after the genocide. But when you accept to forgive, to be connected to other people, to live with them, to share the same country with them, then you move forward.
100 years ago, almost to the day, a bicycle on a stool changed the history of Western art forever. And a suffragette who didn't yet call herself a feminist died disrupting a horse race. And Stravinsky's Rite of Spring caused a riot in Paris. And Proust changed our understanding of memory and longing. And Joyce altered what we mean by a sentence. Together with countless others all over the world, they disrupted our understanding of what counted as art and of what counted as reasonable. And 100 years later, you are in Oxford working on nothing less than a revolution in social justice. And your bicycle on a stool is social entrepreneurship. Your acts of disruption may still look a little odd in the world of arbitrage and quarterly earnings and shareholder value. But believe me, they are not odd. The artists already know. They know before we know, and you are the artists of social entrepreneurship. And today, you sing and drum of disruption. Your beat is of people's capacity to invent, of the boundless, limitless, disruptive power of human creativity. That's why you're here, and why what you do is so wondrously important. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 10th Skoll World Forum. Welcome back to those of you who've experienced my favorite happening before. And to those of you for whom this is the first time, welcome home. I hope this week in Oxford will leave you moved by what you see, changed by those around you, inspired by their stories, committed to their purpose. You've joined the most important project in the world. We meet this year under the rubric disruption, that restless search for discontinuities and sustainable innovations that improves our world and makes us wonder how we lived before. Disruption is what happens when one thing renders another obsolete, when an idea or a service or a product ruptures the smooth continuity of previous orthodoxies. And these are critical moments. Growth promises both salvation and doom, and how that paradox resolves is up to us. It is up to you. Our hope, and the forum's promise, is that all the ideas, interventions, projects, partnerships that we celebrate here will tip over into a massive force for positive social change and resolve the paradox in our favor. You are disruptors. You learn the rules in order to break them. You study the surface in order to get underneath it. You bend the established tools to your will. You recognize that partnerships are the world's greatest natural resource. And by meeting here, you're betting that together, your disruptions have the power to move whole systems and institutions. And we live at a time when the cost of innovation has never been lower, when the idea, the tool, the solution, the project can come from anywhere and reach anywhere. And that is astonishingly, awesomely disruptive and will not leave the world's injustices intact or its surface unruffled. And in the spirit of exactly that disruption, we thought we'd dwell now not on the last 10 years, tempting as that is, but on the next 50. And we asked some of you to speculate, and we think you may be interested in the result.
Yeah, 50 years' time. Well, I wonder what the world will be in 50 years.
In 100 years from now,
Wow, that's a big question. Where do I think?
Well,
I was afraid of that question.
If you look at progress in general in the last 100 years, I think it's been strong and ugly. We have more, so we've progressed, but as Confucius would say, more than enough is too much.
The big issues of today are environmental or social. Poverty, access to clean water, health, education.
We're fundamentally changing the chemical makeup of the Earth.
Everything that's happening now, we brought this upon us. We created it.
The decision makers are really not acting in what is in the best interest of the public.
The most likely outcome is that there will be some terrible tragedies, and then we will see radical change.
These problems are not simple. There's not simple silver bullet solutions.
We certainly have information that's valuable and we can use to avoid making the same mistakes again.
I think the question is, will we face it? Will we take the short-term view?
Your brain is most definitely not programmed for long-term thinking. It really operates most effectively in the here and now.
you and I are fundamentally not different from hunter-gatherers. We still have basically the same brain, the same neural connections, and so we have this extraordinary situation that there is this mismatch between our natural evolutionary timescale and the timescale of socioeconomic evolution. If you demand open-ended growth, exponential growth, that means you have to innovate faster and faster, and you can't keep up with it. And that system, I believe, is doomed to collapse.
We're kind of at the point of no return of trying to deal with some of our problems in a linear way. We need nonlinear change, and nonlinear change only happens when you get sort of a wildfire of support from the people.
We know the solutions are out there. The question now is, how do we connect them?
We know what we need to do, but we seem to lack the will to do it.
We do need to bring all these minds together, and we need to recognize all of these problems are interconnected. I see the world as networks. Everything from the way mitochondria within cells work, and cells within bodies work, organisms work, cities work. They are networks. And the internet itself is a network. And in that sense, it's almost spiritual. You see this great unity of life. It's kind of amazing, actually.
We are quickly becoming a global neural network. The power of a correct idea in this interconnected age spreads so quickly that scale can happen on a never-before pace.
Once you get to the point where just anybody in any community is empowered to learn, design, create, and participate, it'll allow everybody to feel a sense of both ownership and responsibility to each other and to the rest of the world.
A world where we've moved from presentation to participation, where billions more voices have entered the conversation.
There's so many entities deploying resources to solving the world's most significant challenges. Often they're working in silos, not collaborating, not realizing that they may be tackling some of the same problems. Now a problem can be considered, thought about, crowdsourced, and shared by not just the people who have already thought about a problem, but people who have never thought about the problem. People who may provide, when they think about the problem, a breakthrough insight.
Once in a while, I also do think about energy, and I think, yeah, we should use, for example, solar energy instead of oil.
Taking oil, which is actually quite precious, and burning it is like using the furniture in your house as firewood.
If you look at how people charge cell phones in Africa, all of those ways that they figure out to charge those cell phones, nobody in America would ever have figured them out. Frugal engineering happens in the absence of abundance. Living in a frugal society doesn't mean you're disadvantaged. It means you're advantaged in thinking from the perspective of efficiency.
We saw a loan from Nairobi, Kenya, go to someone in Oakland, California, really changing which way people are helping people. So long we've conceived of the North helping the South, but it's so wonderful to see the reverse.
This kind of arrogance that just because we have more money that we're smarter has given us this kind of blindness to the fact that we really don't understand these communities we're trying to help. It's because we're trying to fix things with resources rather than trying to fix things through understanding.
Understanding how well-being is created and how we're connected to one another and how another person's happiness is so deeply tied to our own.
Change happens with people. The more people that are empowered through connection technologies, the more ability we have to collapse geographic distances so that an inequity happening across the globe is not perceived as so remote.
The cost of innovation, the cost of learning, the cost of participation has gotten so cheap that those people who are being sidelined by those in power now have the capability to self-organize and become active participants in society.
When you work as a grassroots level, working with all kinds of people on the ground, that power of people will never be matched with anything else.
Once you give somebody an idea, they can't not have the idea. Like a man who lights his light from my taper doesn't diminish the fire that I have.
As we become more interconnected, as great ideas swirl faster and faster around the planet, we will become more conscious, and our sense of basic dignity will kick in.
The power of connection may reveal what we're capable of and what is possible.
The problems of this world are so big and they're so urgent that they demand disruptive thinking, audacious thinking.
I think we still have to fight like hell to try to have this happen.
We must work together. We must, if we want to have a better world.
We need to redefine that sense of what growth is.
I believe there is wisdom in all of us. I believe there is empathy in all of us. We just need to tap into them.
There's not time for us to think in incremental terms. We need to agitate. We need to inspire others.
The people who write the songs and the culture of the day are going to change society more than those who are in charge of policy and the law.
We should be allowed to be creative, and that will mean not quite getting it right again in the future.
So in that way, I think that the future will be a lot better.
Will it be better than what I have now? Wish I could be around to see that, but I actually think it will be. I do.
Hello and welcome to the 10th anniversary of the Skoll World Forum. Isn't it? Isn't it amazing that we've been coming together this way for an entire decade? While we still haven't quite solved all the problems in the world yet, I'm encouraged and inspired by the progress we see all around us. As the voices in the video so clearly articulated, we live in a time when we're interconnected as never before. Being part of this interconnected community and enjoying the company of inspired social entrepreneurs are two of the reasons I really enjoy coming to this forum every year. And I heard a story a few days ago that underscores why this may be. A little old lady sold pretzels on a street corner for $1 each. Every day, a young man would leave his office building at lunchtime, and as he passed the pretzel stand, he would leave her $1, but never take a pretzel. This offering went on for more than 3 years. The two of them never spoke. One day, as the young man passed the old lady's stand and left his $1 as usual, The pretzel lady spoke to him for the first time in 3 years. Without blinking an eye, she said, "They're $1.25 now." That pretzel lady had a quality we greatly admire in social entrepreneurs, and that is what in Yiddish we call chutzpah. You might also call it moxie, brazen nerve, or sheer guts. By any definition, you have chutzpah in spades, and it's chutzpah that allows you, without blinking an eye, to make outrageous requests and change the world. And there is powerful evidence of this change all around us. We are nowhere near the finish line, but we can and should celebrate the progress of your work in recent years. In that spirit, I present my top 10 list from the world of social entrepreneurship over the past decade. Number 10, technology drives social, social drives technology. 6 out of every 7 people on the planet own a mobile phone. You can use technology for everything, from sending money to your mother in Nepal to diagnosing that cut on your finger. There is an enormous potential for change that arises when we all have access to information, and social entrepreneurs capitalize on this change like no one else. Number 9, global commitments to scaling up innovation. Thank you, United Kingdom. Thank you, Canada. Thank you, United States, for within the past 10 years recognizing the effectiveness of social entrepreneurship and empowering social entrepreneurs in their own communities. This has sent a strong signal around the world about the strength of government commitment, and it's an important validation for all of our efforts. I'm still waiting on my invitation to Buckingham Palace, though. Number 8, Muhammad Yunus and Grameen Bank win the Nobel Peace Prize. It doesn't get more impressive than this, the ultimate recognition for Muhammad Yunus, the ultimate social entrepreneur. Number 7, and who would have thought it, the next year, Al Gore and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change also received the Nobel Peace Prize, a testament to the growing wave of social entrepreneurship in the world. Number 6, deforestation rates on the decline. This is a promising trend we're seeing in some parts of the world. For example, Brazil, which had previously been responsible for about 1/3 of the world's forest carbon emissions, has radically reduced deforestation so that over 2 billion tons of carbon are not being put in the atmosphere. This battle isn't over yet, as we'll hear from Marina Silva later in the conference, but to date, this is the single greatest reduction in carbon emissions that we have ever accomplished. Number 5, clean water. We take water for granted, but if you have to do without, you know how important it really is. Over the past 20 years, over 2 billion people have gained access to improved drinking water. In fact, the Millennium Development Goal to cut in half the proportion of people without access to safe drinking water was met in 2010, 5 years ahead of schedule. Number 4, social entrepreneurship goes mainstream. 10 years ago, we may have been seen as rogue disruptors, on the edge, slightly off kilter. Today, social entrepreneurship has gone mainstream because of your success. Recent estimates say around 40 million people and 200 million volunteers are working in social entrepreneurship worldwide. Number 3, shifting of markets towards sustainability. When your corner coffee shop promotes fair trade coffee and McDonald's offers sustainably sourced fish, we know we are in the midst of a powerful trend. Companies now realize they can achieve profitability and sustainability without sacrificing humanity. Number 2. Significant progress against significant killers. A decade ago, the world was still trying to figure out how to fight diseases like malaria, TB, and HIV/AIDS. Today, over 8 million lives have been saved from those diseases alone, and the infrastructure is in place to save millions more. And the good news goes on. Guinea worm is poised to be the next human disease eradicated, the first one since smallpox, and polio is expected to be next in line. We're also, yes, absolutely. We're also getting faster at detecting and responding to pandemics. What took almost 6 months in 1996 took only 20 days in 2010. That's still too long, but we're getting even quicker. And the number one accomplishment in the world of social entrepreneurship over the past decade, drum roll please, thank you. Fewer people living in poverty than ever before. For the first time since poverty trends have been monitored, poverty rates have fallen in every developing region. 20 years ago, almost half of the people in developing countries were living in poverty. Now, it's closer to 20%. If we continue along these lines, we could bring extreme poverty to virtually zero within 1 generation. Some would call this impressive progress. We call it a good start. But if we thought the world was fragile 10 years ago, it may be even more so now. Our rapidly increasing population intensifies climate change. We've had some major weather events, from ravaging droughts to retreating glaciers to massive storms such as Hurricane Sandy. But there are promising signs as well. More countries, corporations, and leaders are stepping up to address the incredible damage we've done to our planet. For example, our friends at Ceres persuaded the US government to force public companies to disclose their risk from climate change. This small but significant victory helps us understand what might be possible if companies and investors take the long-term view. The list of challenges facing us in the next 10 years is long. The good news is you have all proven that large-scale positive change is possible. And I know that if anybody can solve these issues, it is you. It is because of the potential of our community that I am hopeful that if I were to make a top 10 list for a future forum, it might include every child, female or male, wealthy or poor, born anywhere in the world, receives a basic education. Or pandemics are found only in the history books. Weapons are sold only in antique stores. Ambitious? Yes. Possible? Absolutely. Because social entrepreneurs like you will keep doing it until we truly live in a sustainable world of peace and prosperity. On this 10th anniversary, I am personally inspired by your commitment to solving the world's most pressing problems and the spirit in which you do this incredible work. I thank you for your work on the front lines from the bottom of my heart for the privilege of your partnership. I look forward to what we will create together this week and in the years to come. Thank you.
One of the features of our forum is passionate conversation. Your conversations are rehearsals for actions that take place everywhere, all the time. And one of the things we've learnt from you is just how much perseverance and emotional energy your work requires. You move mountains with your energy and your passion, and you do it over and over again. You commit the 10,000 hours to be outstanding at something, and you do it for public good. We're very fortunate tonight to be able to eavesdrop on a very important conversation that will address this continuous, necessary intensity. Mabel van Oranje does profound work. She is a serial entrepreneur for social change and a long-standing friend of the Forum. She will host what I'm sure will be a passionate conversation. It is my great pleasure to introduce her to you tonight. Mabel.
Good afternoon. We're going to be talking about the passion and perseverance that is needed to be a successful entrepreneur. And I must say, we have an amazing panel to do so. 3 seasoned social entrepreneurs who each themselves have done enormously groundbreaking work in the fields in which they have engaged. But also, I think for many of you, and definitely for me, all 3 of them are role models of what it means if you want to promote justice, peace, and prosperity. And you know what? Collectively, they have more than 100 years of experience in social entrepreneurship. Let me introduce them to you. Paul Farmer, seated next to me, works in Haiti, in Harvard, and in Rwanda. He's the co-founder of Partners in Health, which brings high-quality healthcare to the poor. He's the chair of the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard Medical School. And he's also the UN Special Advisor to the Secretary General on community-based medicine in Haiti. Next to him is Gro Harlem Brundtland. She was the first female Prime Minister of Norway. She's a former director of the World Health Organization. She has played many governmental and intergovernmental roles on climate change and sustainability. She's a member of the Elders, but most importantly, I think she is really a social entrepreneur avant la lettre. I asked her at some point, you know, why didn't you enter into the world of NGOs? And she said, you know, at the time when I got engaged, if you cared about global problems, there were no international NGOs yet. You would go into the UN system or you would go into government, and you did both. And then next to her is Bill Strickland, who's the president and CEO of Manchester Bidwell Corporations and its subsidiaries, which he established 45 years ago in 1968 in Pittsburgh. And basically, his empire, if I may call it that way, works with disadvantaged and at-risk youth through involvement with the arts, and also they provide job training for adults. With that, let's go to this question of passion and perseverance. And I would like to explore in the coming 40 minutes what is driving social change really about. But also, I would like to understand better, because we will all hopefully learn from that, what does it take from the individual? What does it mean for the person who's behind the successful stories of the social entrepreneur? And let's start with I guess an easy question. Bill, what was your original vision? What drives you? Why did you engage?
I actually think I had what I've come to accept as a spiritual experience, which I was in denial about for a long time. And it came as a result of almost accidentally meeting a public school teacher in our inner city school who happened to be a ceramic artist. Was passing by the art room door. The guy made a great big old ceramic vessel. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And it opened up a portal into my head in terms of how life could be. He was surrounded in light. And I saw a vision of how I could get from darkness into light. as the result of that public school teacher. And it allowed me to see the world as a place of opportunity rather than a place of defeat. The experience was so profound and so transforming, it actually altered the trajectory of my life permanently. And because I was so profoundly affected, I wanted to explore what the possibilities of that vision were in terms of a remediation strategy for the people in my community who were suffering, who did not have the benefit of that spiritual experience, and who did not have a benefit relative to hope in life. I'm still playing out that trajectory to this very moment.
Thank you. Gro, what about you?
Well, I'm thinking as a child, well, I certainly never had a spiritual experience like you had. To me, it was growing up as a child asking questions. You know, how do you create your own values or base them in yourself? How do you find out what's important for you? What is the world about? What is your society about? What's wrong? What needs to change? And that was the road to define in myself. I must see where I can help change society, help society and the world to be a better place. And in the end, I chose to become a physician because that was one way. You know, people normally think, well, did you think of being a surgeon? No. I thought public health was essential for the future of populations and for the world.
Thank you. What about you, Paul? What's driving you?
Those are two different questions. There's
well,
what's driving you.
Where did you start? No, I'm sorry,
well,
where did
because,
you start?
You know, Bill talks about an epiphany, right? Literally a vision, which strikes me as very beautiful, and grow of a process. And, you know, I'd have a hard time pointing to one or the other. I can say that by the time I was, you know, I saw some things happen. I knew I was going to be a physician already in Haiti. You know, I was 23, but I had to get to Haiti, right? I had to have some idea that I wanted to work. I was raised in Florida. You know, I had to have some idea. In fact, I had applied for a Fulbright scholarship to go to Senegal, and it never occurred to me that I wouldn't even be offered an interview, much less the Fulbright. So Haiti was plan B, and there's just, all through life, these kind of serendipitous events that are sometimes successful and sometimes failures, they can still lead in a certain direction. And the one thing I'll mention that has this epiphany-like feeling is I saw people my age, 23, 24, who I worked with in Haiti in community health. One of them died in childbirth or shortly thereafter. Another died of cerebral malaria, misdiagnosed with psychiatric illness and sitting in a doctor's office. And the third died of typhoid fever, perforated ileum, died in the operating table in great pain. And I just said, that's what I'm going to do. And by then, whatever process or epiphany that we might draw on was, in a way, irrevocable.
One of the things I discovered is that hope is a medicine. It can cure cancer of the spirit. I discovered that through application and observation. It is as powerful a medicine as anything that these physicians can give a patient. And the absence of that medicine produces a cancer that is totally destructive. And so I decided I was going to manufacture hope, that was going to be my product, and that I would figure out a strategy to get that vaccine to as many people on the planet as would be possible during the duration of my life.
I got to add one thing though, Bill. As you're manufacturing hope, which I would like to sign up for a big dose tonight, we also need to manufacture chemotherapeutic agents, antiviral agents.
Yes, sir.
You're all, the work you've done are examples of success stories. And we all love success stories and we celebrate them, and donors expect good track records and they want us to make sure that we all spend our money wisely. But we also all know that in our sector, success comes with failure. And we are not very good at discussing failure. Gro, I was wondering, could you share some of your experiences with failure with us?
You know, when Mabel asked me this question, I said frankly to her, look, basically as I look at my life, I don't, you know, it's a kind of long-term success story. So I don't notice the failures. That was my first reaction. Then I realized that why is this? Because I was following my values, my convictions, my vision about how I could help create a better Norway and a better international community. And on the way, there were obstacles, there were difficulties, there were enormous criticism, things to be addressing which were very problematic, very difficult, that, you know, took every power you had in yourself to convince people about what was right. Now then, I said to myself, well, we lost the election in 1989 after 3.5 years in government. Was that a failure? Well, we lost. But our view and my view about what we were doing was long-term, not short-term. So we lost an election, but 1 year later we were back. And the successes of the difficult policies we had to carry through, they came some years later. So it is this conviction that when you are pursuing your passion, your convictions, and you are aware that it may take a long time, which is perseverance, by the way, it's a combination, then you can take setbacks, climbing hills, and be happy about the success that comes behind it after, at a longer term, with a longer term view, I think.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us. Bill, what about your views on this? Do you think we should be more open in sharing failures?
I actually think that's the only way to learn. You have to take risks and you have to be able to evaluate what happened in order to improve on it. If there's no risk-taking, there can't be any possibility of failure, but there also can't be any possibility of success. I think it's inherent in the nature of the process that there will be failure. But out of those failures can come some pretty extraordinary successes, spectacular successes, if you're smart enough to be in a position to appreciate what has happened to you so you can build on it.
Paul, you want to come in?
Well, you know, I think that I just described to you 3 failures. These were my peers, my friends, the same age as me, with just as much vigor and optimism and hope as anybody else. And, you know, I do understand that there's a way to look at setbacks as a possibility for improvement, but they're dead. And every time a woman dies in childbirth, it's a failure. Every time someone dies, let's just say, of a treatable malignancy without getting either treatment for that malignancy or pain, you know, treatment for pain, palliation for pain, you know, that's a failure of modernity, because as scientific progress increases, and the yield on it's been stunning. I mean, in medicine, the tools we have to prevent, diagnose, and treat early suffering, unnecessary suffering, are just amazing. But as the pace of technology improves, the damage done by failing to have an equity plan to get that improvement to everyone who needs it is a failure, I think. And I think we're all complicit in that failure.
But Paul,
yes, Dr. Brundtland.
You are talking of, you know, it's not your failure you're talking about, it's our failure as humanity, as societies, as the world. But I think that's an important distinction here, because you took this determination in your own personality about having seen these people die. You as a doctor could not save them, and you took a number of conclusions from that. and you started into the world, you know, looking at these issues in a broader sense. And this is, you know, this is widening the perspective to all of us, in a sense, because the failure is on all of us, not on you. To the contrary, you did the right thing. You pursued something that you became convinced of, and due to that, you convinced others as you started Partners in Health.
Thank you. To be very personal, because I was encouraged to talk personally, for some of the young ones who are in this movement, long before I got fancy and social entrepreneur and this and that, I was in a community with an idea about how I wanted to change life in that community. I lost all the funding through no fault of my own. The government changed policies, and I was at the point of real despair. I ended up going up to the local bar, a couple martinis, 10 o'clock in the morning, and I had a vision of what could happen.
No, wait a second. That's quite. All right, I'm going to prescribe something for that. You give me the hope, and then two visions. All right, sorry.
And out of that vision came the courage to do what I should have realized all along. Execute on your vision. Play out your hand. What I recognized is that these guys who were sitting around me recognized that this was pain that I was dealing with, not success. And so by executing on your vision when sometimes it's at the darkest is exactly how you can arrive at success. Don't assume that just because you're in a particular situation that that is the only way it could be forever. And sometimes there's a lot of darkness before you see light.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Another issue that we maybe don't talk about enough, and that is the relation between social change and behavior change. And it's maybe a taboo like failure is. Maybe because we don't know a lot about social norms, habits, traditions, although I know there's some people here in the room who know a ton load about how you change behavior. But it's very sensitive, and yet it seems to me if you want to do anything that's lasting, you need to create that hope. You know, any progress we have made on the big issues, ancient slavery, the abolition, female genital mutilation, the way we think about our enemy, the environment, how we treat it, the treatment of women, much, if not all of it, is linked to behavior change. That's what you do, Bill, all the time. What's your advice?
My advice is stand for something. Believe in something. Stand for right, oppose wrong. Do good, not bad. And regrettably, if you're going to lead, you have to be an example that you want people to follow. Because if you're not prepared to do that, don't lead. Because regrettably, responsibility comes with this business that we're in. And you're going to attract the hopes and aspirations of a lot of people, whether you like it or not. And I believe that you have a responsibility to be the example of the world that we hope to live, and not the example of the one we hope to leave.
Paul, you're also an anthropologist, so you know a little bit about it.
I know a little bit about it, but I don't want to exaggerate. And because I have seen what exaggerating the agency of people who are sick and abused and beaten down, what mistakes can be made when we exaggerate people's ability to make choices. And I'll just give an example. You know, if you're working in a prison as a doctor, and you know you're dealing with an airborne disease, and there's no infection control, then you can say all that you want to the prisoners about, you know, you got to change your behavior, stop breathing this air, but it's not going to have any impact. And I've seen it, you know, a lot, you know, in my line of work. It's just to put out there that one is that poverty and gender inequality and extreme circumstances that I've seen, you know, Rwanda after the genocide, for example, or places where there's a lot of violence, because of civil war, or worse, because there's, again, genocide is not the same as civil war. In those settings, it's unwise to exaggerate the ability of people to make change because they're so constrained by forces that are beyond their control. And in public health, for example, some of the most solid ways to create, and Dr. Brundtland has worked on this for much of her life, some of the most solid ways to create cultural change are to make it more difficult to do bad things and make it easier to do good things. And for example, if disability rights in the United States, how many of those were about cultural change and behavior change, and how many of them were about legislation to protect the rights of the vulnerable? And outlawing the slave trade, which you already mentioned. Some of that was due to cultural change that came out of community organizing. There are people in this room writing about that or written about it. Some of it came out of legislation and with more bite. So I just think claims about causality of social change and cultural change, we have to be careful about them because it's not easy to change culture. If every organization you're running into says, here's our theory of culture change, I think we should be a little bit suspicious that might not be really well buttressed theory of social change, but a little bit of faddishness that creeps into our work in social entrepreneurship.
Gro, Norway is the country where I think women are about as equal as men as you will find in any place on earth. Do you know some of the secrets of the success?
I think there is probably a long historic situation. Norway in the old day, the Viking time and so on, the men went out, hunting or warriors across Europe. The women stayed home and take care of the family. They did the fishing. They did their local agriculture. They became in charge of their families. So I think for a long number of years, women's position in Norway probably made it a little easier for us who started really promoting big change in the 60s and 70s. As we put on the agenda what needs to change with regard to the rights of women. And that, of course, happened through legislation, through conviction, through appealing to people and having them understand we are equal individuals, we should have the equal opportunities. Why should there be any limitations to what women can do and compared to men, etc.? And to put precise objectives on the agenda and push for them. Like the 40% rule that we pushed in my party. Any body elected by the Labour Party has to have at least 40% of either sex. We prepared and did that in 1983. It was seen to be radical, and there was a lot of opposition. But within 2 years after that, every county in Norway, in my party, had been able to make lists for the parliamentary election that had equal numbers of men and women on every, electoral part of Norway. So the opposition was there, but once we had done it, we could go forward. Now all parties in Norway agreed to this, and we have basically close to a 50-50 situation in parliament and in government. No prime minister after me will ever dare not to have at least 40% women on the cabinet.
Yeah.
Well done. Well done. Bill, you want to...
That inspires a thought in my own mind, just reacting here to right and wrong, standing for something. In my neighborhood, there's 4 blocks from where my little center is. There's a school, public school. It has metal detectors, cameras, bars in the windows, guards in the hallway with walkie-talkies, and police dogs and canine units in front of the building every day. I built a center 4 blocks away and refused to put in a metal detector, or cameras, or guards with guns, or canine units. No incidents in 26 years in the same neighborhood. So the principle is that sometimes you have to take a risk on behalf of what is right in order to alter the conversation. If there is no risk-taking, there is no possibility of change. And I think I would encourage those of you who have a vision about what you think is right within the context of where you operate. We are in need of your taking a position that we can see on behalf of doing the right thing.
This work can come at huge personal cost. You can be very lonely at times. You can give up hope that what you're trying to do is really making a difference. You cannot be there on important moments in the lives of your family and your friends. How do you deal with that? How do you cope? Grow, you want to go first?
I think, well, first of all, I said earlier I was lucky. I mean, I know I was lucky in growing up in a very supportive family. And not only with a mother, but a father who supported and took for granted that a girl could do exactly the same as a boy, which was not obvious when I was 10 or 15. Now that's a lucky start, but then I happened to find a lucky, solution as I married my husband. I was really lucky. You couldn't know, but the fact is, without, his support from the beginning, our companionship, and when I then was given all these, big obligations, supporting me and being there when I needed to have that close family contact on the daily basis. Many days were fine, others certainly were not. And to have somebody to tell the story and to cry with if you needed to was wonderful. So that's part of that thing.
Let's give a hand to the man who's sitting there.
But then maybe I should add, as the children grow up, together we handled the necessities of the daily life, and he supported when necessary, and it all worked. But of course, when these children are grown now, they do tell me that they sometimes did suffer from having a mother who was a political leader in the country. Because politics in any country is divisive. You have supporters, and you have people opposing because they want to win the next election. So these children, without telling me, I did not know until they were grown, told me stories about what happened in their school days, my son in his military service, people pointing fingers at them because of their mother, But in a way, I'm glad I didn't know, or I could have regretted. I mean, I couldn't have avoided this. There is no way around it. But this is, to be a political leader is different from many of the social entrepreneurs in this audience. Yeah. Because you are not, pushed day by day with systematic criticism, which is part of the whole story. So it's worse. So I hope most of you can take care of your families without having this destiny of your children telling you how terrible it was to be told how terrible your mother was or your father.
Paul, what about your kids and about you?
I think, first of all, I'd just like to say, I think this work is actually full of a lot of joy. Mm-hmm. And if you work, let me just an example. If you work on an equity platform to deliver something, again, I'm going to talk about medicine, but I believe the same could be said about education, financial services, efforts to, again, going back to the film that generates so much optimism. But sticking with medicine, if you have an equity platform, and you have some of the tools that you need to prevent or treat illness, and then you deliver, you see a lot of people get better. And there's a lot of joy in that. And so my primary experience of hard work, going to places that don't have modern medical services and being part of a team to build that is actually very satisfying. Now, what should you do with your children? Of course, you should force them to work with you. And, like bring them to the Skoll forum like Stephan did and I have. I think it's just going to be different for everybody.
We need a bigger room next year, Jeff, I'm afraid. Bill, you want to come in?
I think the reality is that there is a price to be paid for doing this work, unfortunately, but it doesn't have to be life-threatening. You don't have to sacrifice your firstborn to do this work. And I think Paul touched on it. There is extraordinary joy and oxygen that comes from the process, and if that is not happening, you're in the wrong business. Number two, you better be hanging with somebody you like. Now, I'm working on my third and final marriage of this life. And I developed a new concept. Why don't you marry somebody you like this time? See how that works. I did romance, I did champagne. My recommendation is marry somebody you like, because life is really played out there. It's normal, it's life, it's relationships, it's conversations, it's caring. And you must be tied together with people who celebrate the work that you're doing. Because if they're not going to celebrate the work that you're doing, ultimately they won't celebrate you.
Social...
It's his third revelation, by the way.
Social entrepreneur, the term means it's not by yourself, right? The very term is supposed to, if I was correctly informed by Sally Osberg some years ago, when she, being an expert clinician, diagnosed me as a social entrepreneur, before I had the complete lab workup and could confirm with pathologic studies. It's social. You're doing it with others. It's not your own quest for personal efficacy or effectiveness. It's with others, and that's another big part of it, is working with people who share these values, as Bill was saying. And there's a lot of there's other really hard times. You don't take on lethal problems or of the sorts that Jeff mentioned in his top 10 list. You don't take those on without running into a lot of pain and suffering. It's about poverty and inequality. That's what it's always about. But you're always working with other people, never alone.
Bill.
And make sure that you populate your world with people who feel the way that you do about the world, so that you don't get caught in this trap where you feel that you're doing this alone. That is not a requirement to improve the world, that you do this by yourself. In fact, I would highly recommend that you don't try that. Surround yourself with people when you're down, they're up, so you can learn and benefit from each other. And out of that process comes excitement. For example, Paul and I have known each other for many years, but it's only on this day, prior to this forum, that we just made a deal that we're going to work together in Haiti. We were sitting on the couch in the green room, and we made a deal, because that's oxygen. That's how this process is supposed to work. We made each other's day big time.
Do you ever think about succession? I mean, none of us will be around forever. And what are you doing to make sure...
If scientific progress continues, some of us may be around forever. That was the only thing I was going to add, Mabel, is to our list, is if you're involved in teaching, especially younger generations, so that's everyone's plan of succession. I think that's why all of us do teaching, one way or the other, is because that's the very best way to succeed through succession. Again, it's not some legacy of an individual, but rather these social goals. They need to be shared and improved by the next generation. They're going to be a lot better than we are.
Gro, you want to say something on that?
Well, I'm just thinking that how we have been, working hard, struggling even, within the elders that Mabel and I have been together on for several years, to find new elders. Because in fact, we are all, who started 2007, now 6 years older than we were when Nelson Mandela called us together. It has proven to be difficult, but we have to. So
but maybe that's because people don't retire anymore.
That's the other, that's part of it. Because, I mean, one of the most energetic persons I know is Jimmy Carter. He's, I think, now 87, 88.
He's the Energizer Bunny of American presidents.
My goodness, I mean, So again, sometimes when you have very strong and, dedicated people around you, and they continue, working long into their 80s, you don't have to think that much about succession.
Bill.
I think that the measure of our genius is going to be determined after we're gone. We preach sustainability in the environment. We need to preach sustainability in the institutions that we're building. That's sustainability that really matters. And one of the hint that I think I'm on the right street, I was giving a tour to some people at my center, and I walked into one of the classrooms, and one of the young kids said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Great center you got here, kid. I wish you well." And I thought, there's the first indication that I'm doing my job. He no longer associates me directly with the work, that the process now has an independence of its own. I thought that was a very positive sign.
Fantastic. Cool.
I just want to make a pitch because we talked about perseverance on the phone, and you talked to us before we got here. And one of the pathologies that I think we see a lot in this quest for innovation and disruption, one of the traps is that we forget that things need to be sustained.
Yes, sir.
So that you take the any example that Gro could give you from Norway, some progressive policy or improvement, or that Bill could give you from one of the centers from across the States and elsewhere, and I could certainly give from experience of trying to put hospitals and clinics in places that didn't have them. A lot of us want to be there to start a new project or see some innovation or roll out a new technology or bring it to scale, whatever the latest, again, fad may be. Keeping something running so it really serves people, especially poor and vulnerable people, requires a long-term view, meaning decades. And it requires support, long-term support. And it's irresponsible if we can't, when we talk about succession, perseverance, I think for us not to understand that these institutions require constant, investment. I'm not talking about money only. I mean, ideas, love, compassion into the systems, nurturing them.
One of the things I hope we'll develop out of these conversations is a methodology for the next generation to learn the habits that we've acquired through scars on our backs, so that you get steeled for the mission that's in front of you, and that we have the good officers to give you some sense of how to survive the lifestyle that you've elected to follow. I think we have an obligation for the new ones coming into this to let them hear how we have got to this point, and let them know that we're here to be with them on their journey as long as we have availability of time and space.
If you look back, with everything you know now, what do you wish that what you know now that you had known at the beginning of your journey?
I should have executed on my vision when I had it, and not hesitated, because there were a lot of lives that got lost in my hesitation. And so I'm here to say, act on your dreams just in case they do come true.
Thank you.
I think because I think the same way that Bill does, act upon your dreams and they will come true. This is, in a way, you know, I don't know what I could have known or understood early in life, like a 10 or 15 or 20-year-old, that would have changed my way of prioritizing my time and the way I try to work with others to create change. I think basically it wouldn't have helped, you know, to have some knowledge or experience that I gradually gathered. So I don't see it, you know, what could have helped. As you say all the time, you know, you have the solutions based on science, and they should be available to all. And we should be more concerned about spreading that availability than only looking at finding the new methods, as long as so many people are left behind. But, you know, as I say, I came from a lucky country. To Norway, it has been possible to convince people that we are all in this together. We go together, we share, we have everyone right, you know, to full health and education, and there is nothing like people left behind. This is a societal, you know, responsibility. But you have to fight for it, you have to explain it, you have to create that kind of value base of solidarity across a society and reaching out to the world, which means we have in different parties been able to have Norway the highest, you know, on per capita basis, deliverer of official development assistance. It goes to sustainable development, to education, to health, but it is possible to have the Norwegian people agree to this in the elections. And that's not the case everywhere. So we still have a large gap to fill of people being willing to stand up to the challenges of the world, you know, on a solidarity basis.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking that the translation of that for Gro is, if she knew everything that she knows now and could have changed anything, she would have made us all Norwegian. So
it would have been easier, yeah.
It would have been easier. What you're saying there is very powerful because it is about building systemic change.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, if we think of ourselves as living in one world, not three, first world, second world, third world, and you look at a country that's prosperous but very inegalitarian, like the United States, I think the one thing that I would add is, I mean, this is what my oldest daughter would call TMI, too much information, but understanding how everyone's desire to feel effective and, you know, to use the jargon, empowered, understanding how to capture that quest for personal efficacy and linking it to social justice, transformative change, not just for ourselves, but for people living in poverty, again, oppressed by forces like gender disparity and poverty at the same time, to take this, I think, perfectly, really almost universal quest for self-efficacy and link that to a social justice, a global social justice mission. I know more about it now than I did 30 years ago, and I'd like to know more about it still.
Thank you, Paul. Unfortunately, our time is up. I wish this could have continued for another 2 hours, hopefully over drinks and dinner tonight. I want to thank you for, and I think not just increasing my passion and perseverance and teaching me a bit more about it, but I think I'm doing that on behalf of this whole audience. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Gro. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
There are some works, some writers, some artists, and some thinkers who so profoundly enter our collective consciousness that we know their work before we encounter it. And our next speaker is one of those. He has profoundly shaped our understanding of strategy, of competition, and the context in which organizations function. His influence on individuals, on firms, on governments has been profound. And it won't surprise this audience to hear that in recent years he's been disrupting the smooth surface of what the world understood as value creation. His preoccupation has been with shared value, social innovation, and the ways capitalism might repair itself. We are fortunate indeed to welcome Michael Porter to our forum. Michael.
I'm here this evening to introduce a major new effort in the area of social progress and social entrepreneurship that we hope will become a core part of the infrastructure for social change and for the social entrepreneurship field in the coming years. This effort, as so much in this field, owes a tremendous amount to Jeff Skoll and the Skoll Foundation, who've been one of the pioneering kind of visionaries and supporters behind this effort. The effort is first and foremost about measurement. If we can't measure success robustly and rigorously, it's very hard to make the most rapid progress. So we've got to learn to measure better the social progress we're achieving. And that's what we have come to call the Social Progress Index, that I'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. But the effort is not just about measurement, it's also about catalyzing action at the grassroots level, not only to change success rates at the country level, but also to make the measurement better and better and better. And I want to invite all of you here to participate in this effort. What we're launching here at the forum this year is what I would call version 1. But this is a never-ending process of more deeply and more completely and more rigorously understanding success in social progress, how we can measure it better, and how we can use those measurements to drive change. Now, the kind of starting point for this thinking, I think, is something that this group really needs almost no explanation for. I think we all understand now, even those of us in business and who are deeply involved in economic development and competitiveness, which I have been for 30 years. I think we are all beginning to understand how incomplete our understanding of development has been, how limited our understanding about the role of business and its impact on social change has been. I think we're seeing whole new opportunities. We've long understood that although economic development is beneficial for social progress, generally, it's not sufficient. We also understand that certain kinds of economic development is contrary or threatening to social progress. We're understanding how it's not only that economic development drives social progress, but if we really understand how to create social progress, that actually allows and enables economic development. We're understanding that more and more. And we're also understanding that kind of separating business and competition in business from social progress and societal issues really was a tremendous mistake. Some of the greatest opportunities for business are in tackling social issues and social challenges using the business model. In order to redress this lack of understanding, this lack of insight, we are trying to now take measurement in this field to a different level. We all understand that GDP is insufficient. We've got to go beyond GDP. We have to learn to measure social progress directly and comprehensively and rigorously. And that's what this effort is setting out to do. Now, it's not that nobody's tried to do this before. There's a whole variety of existing efforts which we applaud, which are pioneering, which have blazed the trail You know, the grandfather is the Human Development Index, a real breakthrough in trying to add human and social dimensions to measuring success. The Legatum Prosperity Index, many of you know about, the OECD Better Life Index. All of these have tried to add social dimensions to measuring success in countries and in economies. And then, of course, there's the effort to capture the notion of happiness that has now taken a root and is spreading. But all of these efforts, as good as they are really only a start. They're looking at limited dimensions of social progress. And they suffer from other obstacles and challenges that we in this effort are going to try to overcome. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do. Now, to measure social progress and to measure it comprehensively, which is our intention, we have to have a definition of what we mean by social progress. Our working definition is here for you to read. It's a broad definition. It includes not only meeting basic human needs, but also building certain kinds of foundations and infrastructure in societies to allow communities and individuals to improve their well-being and improve their lives. And it also encompasses the notion of opportunity and choice and freedom and inclusion, and having the tools available to kind of reach the full potential of any individual. Social progress is a very complex, multidimensional phenomenon, but we have to learn how to see it holistically. We can't see it in silos, in little single issues. So as a working definition, this is where we started. Now, how do we translate this broad definition of social progress into a way of measuring? Well, this proves, of course, to be very, very challenging. In order to do that, we have come to believe that there's some fundamental principles of measurement that we have to really apply in this domain that have not yet been applied before. Number one is we've got to separate the social outcomes from the economic outcomes. Virtually all the efforts in this field to go beyond GDP still have the GDP. They still have economic variables together with social variables, but that conflates what's really going on. We know that economic success has a positive, generally positive impact on most social indicators. But unless we separate the economic and the social, we're not going to be able to really sort out what's going on, what causes what the relationships are, and how to make sense of this complicated phenomena. Secondly, we believe that any measure of social progress must start with measuring outcomes. So many efforts to measure social progress really look at inputs, how much we spend, what policy we put in place. But of course, as important as those things are, what really matters is the results, the outcomes. And so this index, this measurement system is really based only on outcomes, how well people and communities actually do. And this really goes way beyond most of the existing efforts, which either are very input focused or they mix inputs and outputs in the same framework. And of course, when you mix inputs and outputs, it's very hard to sort out what's causing what's going on, whether you're really succeeding. So we have set out to try to address that problem. We have built then a holistic framework to try to identify the specific dimensions within this broad concept of social progress in a way that's hopefully clear and will allow debate and discussion and allows us to separate different kinds of social progress that are applicable at all levels of development. And of course, we want a framework that can be relevant to all countries. We're not just looking at social progress in poor countries. We want to look at social progress in some holistic sense because we want to understand the whole trajectory of development and what we can learn from countries at all stages in that process. Our working framework that we'll be releasing results on at 12:01 this evening looks like this. Social progress we conceive of as having three fundamental components. One is meeting basic human needs. There's a number of dimensions of that, which you see here on this slide. For each of these dimensions, we found the best available outcome measures we can for capturing these areas. In the middle has to do with building blocks or foundations of well-being, which would include things like wellness and health, which would include things like access to communication, access to knowledge, and a whole set of environmental determinants of whether you have a sustainable community in which people can live. Again, under each of these components, there are multiple indicators. And then the third big concept is the notion of opportunity. Can an individual rise to their full potential? Do they have the freedom to do that? Or is there the inclusion to allow that? Is there access to the higher forms of education which allow people to reach those heights of whatever they're interested and able to achieve? And again, there's multiple dimensions of that. And we've assembled the best available indicators we can find of those concepts. In all, there are 50 different indicators underlying these dimensions that ultimately roll into this overall assessment of social progress at the country level. Does this framework capture everything? I'm sure it doesn't. But it's the most comprehensive framework we've ever had. Can we improve on it? You bet. And we will, and particularly with your help. Our initial effort has covered 50 countries. These 50 countries are most, if not all, of the large important countries, but also represent as many countries as we could get good, rigorous, comprehensive data that we trusted for. We'd like to do many more countries. And part of this effort will be to drive the scale of this to more and more countries over time as we catalyze the improvement of data, the measurement of some of these indicators in more and more places. And we've had some promising success already in achieving that. If we understand comprehensively how countries are doing on this complex set of social progress indicators, we start to get a sense, we start to be able to understand, how are these things connected? How do they evolve with development? Who's particularly good at this? Who's particularly good at that? All of a sudden, a whole world of progress and insight is open to us that we have not had before. Where we've tended to look at individual issues with a limited amount of data and comparative evidence to consider. Now, what are some of the results of this? Well, the results are to be released tonight, but let me tell you a couple of the highlights. Number one, there's a wide range of performance on social progress in this world. And it's not completely explained by economic success. There are very high-income countries that are not doing very well on social progress. There are relatively low-income countries that are doing remarkably well on social progress. There's an enormous gap between income and social progress. These things are not the same. And we're now in a position to show some of the differences and some of the learning about those differences. We see countries at the same level of income with very different sets of social progress outcomes. We see even the most advanced countries with serious problems to address. So this effort truly illustrates that every country has an agenda here, no matter how wealthy it is or where it is today. And we're now in a position to really identify and prioritize within each country kind of where the key agenda items lay, really at a holistic and a more strategic level. We find that as income goes up in relatively poor countries, you can have very rapid progress in social progress. But as you get to high income and income gets higher and higher, actually you start facing serious headwinds. And there's really a deceleration of social progress in real high income countries, even though the absolute level of performance is still well below perfection. So there's lots of interesting results that we will share with you tonight and over the course of the week about individual countries, about relationships, about trends in the various dimensions of social progress. And again, we invite your reflections, your critique, your pushback, your puzzlement, your excitement, whatever you feel. We invite that. We want to know. This is a multi-year ongoing process where I think we've gotten off to a good start, but we have a long, long way to go. The next steps here are, first of all, to continually improve the measurement process, and I've stressed that already. We need feedback on the measures. We need feedback on what's in the framework. We need feedback on how we can get data developed for individual countries that you might have connections with or you might be able to influence. We can improve the measurement framework. We can enrich it. We can make it more rigorous. We can expand the sample over time. And we want to do that. But we also have an aspiration here, and I think this room is full of people with this aspiration. We want to get something done. We want to create some change. This is not measurement for its own sake. This is measurement to enable action, to enable insight, to enable change, to enable people on the ground to be more effective in pursuing the aims that they have. And that includes social entrepreneurs on the ground, who now I think will be armed with a new set of data, hopefully that's credible and rigorous, to really justify the commitments that you have to particular issues in particular countries. We intend and are already creating a decentralized network, country by country, of organizations that are really committed to understand the results for the country, disseminate them, lobby for change, and otherwise advance the agenda at that country level. And again, some very promising beginnings are already in place. But we invite your participation. This is something that I have become extremely passionate about. I think we can have a breakthrough here. We're starting to see a breakdown or a bridge between the kind of economic development folks and the social progress folks. We're starting to see business start to see social issues not as CSR that you put on the side, but they're starting to see social issues as something fundamental to them and their success and their economic opportunity. I think we have an opportunity here to get a breakthrough. We have an opportunity to kind of, with this kind of rigorous evidence, I think, to kind of make a leap in terms of our rate of progress. And we're very hopeful with your help that we can achieve that over the coming years. You know, I, for many years, was the co-chair of the Global Competitiveness Report, which is kind of the Bible of how you measure competitiveness. And I saw with my own eyes how much impact having that rigorous, granular measurement framework was to catalyzing change at the country level. An enormous amount happened when countries could kind of look comprehensively at their economies and say, where are we? What are we doing well? What are we doing poorly? How do we stand in this area, in this area, in this area, in this area? I'm confident, given that experience and given the energy of all of you, and I think the kind of intellectual synthesizing that's starting to go on in this broad field, that we can see the same kind of step up in progress here. So let me again say how thrilled and pleased I am to be at this meeting, how impressed I am with the energy, with what's been accomplished, with Jeff's top 10 list. Wow. But hopefully this initiative will give us, again, some of the crucial infrastructure to take this even further and even faster. So we invite your participation. Thank you very, very much.
All of us depend on family. Behind you, there sit, of course, the people who love you and who sometimes love your work. Behind all of us in social entrepreneurship, there sits, of course, the Skoll Foundation. And behind the foundation, there sits a huge group of amazingly dedicated and wonderful people. Behind Pamela and our extraordinary students, there sits the Saïd Business School. And behind this amazing forum, there sit a few enlightened companies who understand disruption, who understand return on investment measured in meaning, who understand the power of connected, passionate people. And now, I know few people who move with both fluency and modesty between areas of inordinate complexity and bewildering familiarity. It is my very great pleasure to introduce a great disruptor and a Skoll hero. Ken Brecher is anthropologist, writer, philosopher, friend. He contrives to be sensitive to sentences and sensitive to causes. As Quine used to say, he is very when we are mere. Ken Brecher.
As an anthropologist by training, I've been thinking about you as a tribal group, a tribe of social entrepreneurs. And I'm interested in understanding who are your chiefs? Who are your shaman? What is your ideology? What are the myths that you hold in common? Everything that distinguishes you, what you eat, what is the music that moves you, is coming to the Skoll World Forum a rite of passage. What brings you back each year to this place to sit with others from all over the world with whom you share common values and perhaps common concerns. That's what I'm going to try and identify in my remarks. This is my 5th opportunity to do field work among you. As a participant observer at the Skoll World Forum, and because I was here as a student at New College and at the Institute of Social Anthropology, I feel I've been given the privilege of saying things that are not clearly based on scientific research. What I've chosen to say is drawn from my field notes and from very, very personal observations that are less about objective analysis and more about the result of a desire to understand what it is that makes a person like you decide to do a kind of work where the outcome is never assured. I'm interested in that strong likelihood that you will, in your work, deal with disruption. It will occur. And you will be required to utilize a combination of past experience, creativity, blind faith, and the courage required to see disruption as an opportunity for the pursuit of possibilities. My totally unscientific and unsubstantiated fieldwork observations, let's call them almost facts, about the lives and work of social entrepreneurs suggest the following. Number 1, you are correct, and you will have a better chance of sleeping through the night when you remember that everything is an experiment. Number 2, you do your best work when you don't try to create and analyze at the same time. They're different processes. 3, the great 20th century composer John Cage could have been speaking for you when he said, "I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones." We are breaking all the rules, even our own rules. And 4, the smartest way to work is to not quite know what you're doing. This is often the way that great artists work, and also physicists and mathematicians and activists, embracing the unknown. 5, what is essential is that you educate your intuition and then trust it. The novelist Mark Halperin has come closest to describing what is required of the social entrepreneur. He said you must be willing to be obstinate and irrational and true, to fashion your entire life as a construct, a metaphor, a fiction, a device for the exercise of faith. And with this, you will stay in the fight until the very last. The fight becomes literal when you're faced with disruption. In that moment, all of your strategic planning, existing resources, alliances, and measurable outcomes are thrown into question, and there is no choice but to pursue new possibilities. The disruption may be the result of a change in government, an environmental disaster, the emergence of an unexpected tribal or religious faction, or all of the above. I learned my lessons on the subject in the Amazon forest, and the disruption I witnessed pushed me from being an Oxford-trained social anthropologist doing fieldwork in order to write an academic thesis on the ideology of a previously unstudied tribe of Indians into a world of activism that at that time could not have been further from my initial career goals or plan, the direction I had received from my Oxford tutors. The professor of anthropology at Oxford and the lecturers at the Institute of Social Anthropology cautioned me to introduce nothing to the tribal culture, to leave no trace, to tell the people nothing about our world, to be vigilant about exposing them to both new ideas and new diseases. I spent 2 years with a tribe called the Wausha, who lived in the Xingu River region of the Brazilian Mato Grosso. They were an isolated group of 100 people, living in a village of 6 thatched houses, hunting with bows and arrows, painting their bodies, and living under the leadership of a powerful chief, who every evening addressed the tribe on the subject he had been reflecting upon that day. It might be astronomy, the life cycle of a particular fish, or an interpretation of one of the scores of myths. The myth in question usually had direct application to the behavior of an individual or a family dynamic that had caught the chief's attention during the course of a day spent looking for food. The chief was the wisest person I had ever known, and I wanted very much to earn his respect. But I had been taught that the anthropologist would lose his credibility in the field if he became overly involved in the life of the people. I did understand that I was privileged to be studying one of the last totally self-sufficient tribal groups that for the most part had no real knowledge of Brazil. I was the first non-Indian to speak the Wausha language. When I arrived in the village, neither their language nor their mythology had ever been studied, had ever been recorded. In my first year of fieldwork, I was true to my training and my promise to not disrupt their isolation with material culture from the outside world. I took my field notes, recorded songs, collected myths, made kinship charts, began to imagine myself in the classroom, teaching anthropology to graduate students the way I had been taught, with intellectual rigor and absolutely no politics. I had malarial attacks, but that was a small price to pay for an Oxford DPhil. I slept in a hammock in the chief's house, and his wife kept the fire going during the cold nights and shared the food collected during the day. Our diet was a soup made from manioc roots from which the poison had been extracted. Fish shot with bows and arrows from the prows of dugout canoes, edible insects, the occasional monkey, and during the rainy season, a diet almost entirely of a wild fruit that looked like a giant avocado. I lost 50 pounds in the first 6 months. Before the disruption that changed my life and that of the tribe, I had begun to feel rather proud of myself. I had avoided answering almost all the questions about my tribe. What did we eat? Who were my tribe's enemies? Would I teach them our tribal songs? Was my father a chief? Who was providing my mother with food while I was away from the village? The chief told me, people are defined by what they eat and by their music. After being asked 1,000 times to sing one of my tribe's songs, I broke down, and for reasons I still don't quite understand, sang the Yale University fight song. It was a great mistake. I then had to endure the embarrassment of a group of naked men painted blood red running down to the river for their morning bath, singing at the top of their lungs, "Bula bula, bula bula, bula bula, ila Yale." About the same time, my informant, Tawapu, the man who had taught me to hunt jaguars and how to find turtle eggs buried in the banks of the river, and who had spent countless hours answering my questions about the tribe's kinship structure, began to call me by a nickname. The name seemed to please everyone in the tribe. This is very good, I thought. They like me. Nicknames are a sign of affection. I'm succeeding in not disrupting their lives, and they've come to accept my presence and perhaps understand, even value, my anthropological research. This was a breakthrough moment. And I had always known that Tawapo was very smart. Here was this man in a pre-literate society in the middle of the Amazon forest who had grasped the sophisticated concept of the objective observer, the analytic work of the social scientist. I told Tawapo, I am happy. Awushapaitia, I am happy to have been given a new name. And would you help me to translate it and understand its meaning? Yes, he said, Mutetsi. It's half a leech and half a parrot. Not too long after this humbling moment, I came to realize that my intrusion into the daily life of the tribe was nothing compared to what was heading directly for them. At this moment in time, the chief spoke no Portuguese and did not understand the concept of a country called Brazil. The tribe was not aware to what degree two men, Orlando and Claudio Villas-Boas, had been protecting them, how these brothers had somehow managed to delay the arrival in the region of diamond prospectors and rubber trappers, desperate men and women from a drought-stricken northeastern Brazil in search of land and food and survival. The Villas-Boas brothers had been campaigning in Brasilia and São Paulo to make the Xingu region a national park for indigenous people. They were well aware that in spite of the fact that the Brazilian Constitution provides ownership rights to native people as long as they remain on their ancestral lands, something bigger and more disruptive was now heading toward the Wausha tribe and the others in the region. No road had ever crossed Brazil, the vast forests, the rivers at the center of Brazil. No road. The first highway, the BR-80, BR-80, was now under construction, and unknown to the Indians, thousands of road workers and their massive machinery was heading directly towards them. What would follow is now what exists through much of the interior. Agribusiness, cattle, timber, soybeans, rice, every possible revenue stream that would yield the most immediate and greatest return. Dynamite the trees if necessary, but open the land for multinational corporations who, once the Indians were gone, had acquired titles to it. We were walking through the forest, 100 people heading for the village of the Kalopalo, a neighboring tribe who had invited us to participate in the Kwarup ritual, wrestling tournament, dances, feasting, commemorating one of their chiefs. We were walking in single file, and I was carrying the chief's youngest grandson on my shoulders when we heard the sound of a plane. The Wausha called planes pahokuma, giant birds, and had often seen them flying high in the sky, but this time it was different. This plane was very low and very loud. It was just above the trees, and I recognized it was a small, older cargo plane with no markings. Not much later, we saw with our own eyes what the plane was carrying, its cargo. It was human and barely alive. A small number of totally naked, dazed, and weak adults. There was one baby and a small child. They were the last survivors of a fabled tribe known as the Beso de Pau. The absence of a common language did not stop the Wausha from understanding the story, which the survivors acted out in great detail. The Beso de Pau had experienced what is sometimes referred to as the fatal contact. They had been given gifts of food and blankets by strangers who arrived in their village. Within days, everyone was ill. The symptoms sounded like measles. Entire families perished. There was no one left in that part of the forest where they had lived for generations. As with the Wausha, these people had their own distinct language and no doubt a profound understanding of botanical medicine. Within their own culture, they had been oral historians, naturalists who required no written language. Their young people had known the name of every life cycle of every fish in the river, and they could identify every bird in the forest and were expected to take responsibility for younger siblings and to carry their own weight. They had survived for millennia because of their prowess, and because, like the Wausha, they believed that all food must be shared. No matter how small the amount had been gathered or hunted that day, it was understood that their children must be fed first. This brief encounter with the surviving Beso de Pau changed the course of my life, my sense of the work of anthropologists. My first impulse was to collect evidence of what I had just witnessed. And I still had the camera I had brought in my rucksack when I began my fieldwork, and by some miracle, it was still working, and I photographed the Beso de Pau survivors. Months later, I managed to get the film and a letter to Seymour Hersh at the New York Times. He published an article about the massacre of Indians in the Amazon. It was picked up by newspapers around the world and made headlines in Brazil. It was not until I left the forest that I learned that perhaps as many as 20 tribes had been targeted and were being systematically removed from their land to make room for development. I was ready to do just about anything to draw attention to the situation, to speak to anyone who could be helpful. I edited a book about the cultural heritage of the Xingu tribes and published it in Brazil and in the US. I tried to enlist the leaders of the anthropological field, including Margaret Mead, who was then the best known, the most famous of living anthropologists. She told me, give up. There's no hope. The Indians should be given motorboats, and they could earn a living working for the road workers. I wrote and appeared on my own program on BBC's Radio 4. The playwright Christopher Hampton heard a talk, a lecture I gave, and wrote a play called Savages that was produced at the Royal Court in London and then transferred to New York, California. I had the advantage of youth. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I went to speak with politicians and representatives and the United Nations and the heads of corporations and the governments directly involved in the development of the Amazon. I will never forget the high-ranking Brazilian official who proudly said, "The Amazon, that's our California. Where would the United States be today if you had left California for your Indians? We're just following your example." This was my true rite of passage, my loss of innocence. Being among you, being at the Skoll World Forum, makes me feel optimistic. Social entrepreneurs have what I would like to call a vocation. You are prepared to envision new alliances, new power structures, and to fight until the last for a more equitable and environmentally responsible world. And we all have our work cut out for us. And we all need to be able to turn disruption into opportunity. For the rest of the forum, I am going to be thinking about the women drummers, the women from Rwanda. And it must have sounded not only improbable, but impossible to achieve Ingoma Nysha, the new drum, the new era. The founder who you saw on this stage, Kiki Katezi, she told me that she had gone to the National Museum, to the head of the National Museum, and asked, is it actually forbidden for women to play the drum? Why has this never happened in Rwanda? The answer she received was that it was not forbidden. In fact, there was no specific cultural prohibition. Perhaps it was because drums are heavy, and maybe women are not strong enough to hold and play a drum. To which Kiki had replied, let's just see how strong we are. I'm going to remember the sound of the drums and the answer and the question that we need to ask, that all of us need to ask. Let's ask it. Let's just see how strong we are. Thank you.